We're right with you. The Morning Majority, 5 to 9 on 630 WMAL.
6:37 on WMAL, and we are here with my good friend Eli Lake. And it's summertime, and he is not just an awesome national security reporter for the Washington Times, always breaking stuff. He also, I happen to know, is an expert grill master.
Oh, really?
Oh, really?
Great person to have around during the summer. How you doing, Eli?
You're too kind, Mary Catherine.
Oh, I am not. I've had all kinds of things grilled by you, and I know I'm not too kind.
Well, that's very nice of you to say. It's very hot out.
Well, I wanted to ask you a little bit, speaking of hot, let's talk about Egypt. You had a story last week talking about how in the aftermath of the uprising, when things were very chaotic, basically a bunch of really bad guys and terrorists escaped from all of the prisons and ran around Egypt, and now we're trying our best to round those guys up and get Egypt to help us get them back in custody. What's the deal with that?
It's a major issue that is not discussed publicly between the two governments right now. And at first I said escaped in the chaos of the Egyptian revolution, but in a lot of these cases, as I've looked into it, a lot of these guys were actually let out of jail because they were considered political prisoners, and there was an edict that was made in February that said anyone who's unjustly imprisoned for political reasons should be let out of jail, and that included people who were in jail for, who were charged with assassinating Anwar Sadat, the former Egyptian president who made peace with Israel. And it also ended up including people who had been renditioned to Egypt, who, Clinton sent from Albania, who were part of cells in Al-Qaeda. It included people who were considered major leaders of Egyptian Islamic Jihad and a group called Jamaat Islamiyah that are considered major terrorists by the United States. And subsequently, the military junta that is now in control of affairs in Egypt has been asked by the United States to try to arrest these guys, and they've pretty much not responded.
All right, we were always concerned about the Muslim Brotherhood essentially taking control of Egypt with Mubarak gone. Where does that stand right now? Do you think they have a better chance today than they did a couple of months ago? Where do you see the Muslim Brotherhood in their stance of basically gaining control of the country?
To get a sense of how bad the situation is in this, the guys who the U.S. are really concerned about are the radicals who are not as moderate as the Muslim Brotherhood, who never accepted what Muslim Brotherhood leaders in the 1970s accepted, which was that they were going to give up violence against the state. These are the guys who said, no, the Muslim Brotherhood are a bunch of sellouts. So and they're also forming political parties. It's unclear what that's going to mean, because in some senses, if you have, let's say, the Muslim Brotherhood, which represents political Islam, but then another party that represents, let's call it radical political Islam. I know, maybe distinction in some ways without much of a difference. Maybe if they are not one slate, let's call it the Islamist slate, they would cancel each other out, and it would be better for other political parties. It's kind of unclear how that works out, but the concern, I think, from the counterterrorism intelligence community in the United States is more that you have a bunch of people who have proven they're willing to use political violence to get their way. So even though some of these guys are now saying to the Arabic media that they are interested in participating in elections, there's no real guarantee that they're going to keep their word if the things don't work out their way.
Eli, what about Yemen? I mean, we've been watching what's going on there, and I think this is a sort of an important story that's not getting perhaps the coverage that it should. We now know, for example, that the United States has on occasion sent in jets to take out targets inside Yemen. Give me your read on Yemen, and should we be paying more attention to it?
Well, Yemen is breaking down. It was never, you have to understand, the government of President Saleh was never really in control of certain key provinces where we knew that Al-Qaeda had a safe haven. But in the last 2 months or so, or really in the last month, Al-Qaeda and affiliated groups have taken over even more provinces. The president is now seriously injured, is now in Saudi Arabia getting treatment. And it's a breakdown of what was of the very tenuous authority that the government had there. And so I wrote a story a few months ago that talked about the options the United States had if the Saleh government fell, and basically there are going to still be major counterterrorism operations in Yemen, but they're probably going to be launched from across the Gulf in Djibouti in Africa, or possibly from Iraq. And that's been a major thing that the military has been looking at, is how do you continue to launch drone strikes, how do you continue to launch counterterrorism operations in Yemen if there isn't a central government that's going to allow you to kind of be their partner and give you the cover to do that.
So the proper approach in your mind is an asymmetrical approach to this particular problem.
Well, I don't think the American people are going to kind of sign up for a full-on
fourth war, right? Yeah, they're not.
And it's not something that you really want the United States openly, in like Iraq, trying to govern. I don't think that that's really in the cards for any country right now. And so, yeah, I think you're right. It's going to continue to be an asymmetric approach. Really what we're talking about is the entire U.S. military is slowly but surely going to kind of phase into a counterterrorism, counterinsurgency model where the main thing a lot of our guys are going to do, or our soldiers are going to do, not going to be kind of, invading countries and setting up garrisons, but training, friendly and local tribes and giving them the capacity to go after other groups that are going to be on the ground. And I think that, in that sense, U.S. Special Forces, are the best in the world at that kind of thing.
I was going to ask you about that. We apparently used fighter jets in Yemen not too long ago, which is a little bit different than using the Predator drones. Are we going to see more of that? And if we're actually using military personnel in Yemen, is that an act of war? Is that something where you need to get Congress involved in? Where's the fine line there?
Well, I don't know. I have to look up I know that drones are used, but I would say that there's a whole lot of stuff that does not rise to the level of what both parties at this point would say would be acts of war, including, the Bush administration and how we know the Obama administration. Now, the logic that the Obama administration lawyers say is that if it's an air campaign, it's not war. But I think that both parties would definitely agree that if it's special forces, if it's something that is a kind of a special operation, that's not an act of war. So the United States did not invade Pakistan when, 2 SEAL teams went into Abbottabad to kill bin Laden. Right. But at the same time, that's certainly U.S. military activity in Pakistan, and we now know without the knowledge of the Pakistani government. So in that sense, I guess you could say that there's a lot of activity all over the world the United States does that does not constitute invasions. It's part of a kind of posture of the U.S. in the global war on terrorism.
All right. Eli, are you available for bar mitzvahs or for Father's Day or anything like that for your grilling expertise?
We can talk about it
for a reasonable fee.
You have a rate. You need an agent or something like that.
I've already got him booked for several days, so you guys get second choice.
All right. Good to talk to you, Eli. We always appreciate you coming on.